Hi. In this session, we are going to talk about how to develop a toolkit of resources that will really aid our clients in moving from surviving to thriving in their treatment journey. There are a lot of areas here, so let's just jump in right away. So, when we talk about a resource, and the resources are going to be very important, especially as we have mentioned in earlier sessions, as we start to move into trauma healing. So, a lot of this work and a lot of the discussion of these resources is indeed coming from the work of Dr. Pat Ogden in sensory motor psychotherapy. So, when we think about these areas, these are comprehensive, and resources exist on two levels. One, what is an internal resource in this area, which is more about the capacity to sense it as a resource. And then there is an external part of the resource, meaning what access in your community, in your area, allows you to practice experiencing the internal resource. So let's kind of do a little dive into each of the areas. So let's first start quite simply with somatic resources. So somatic resources from an internal standpoint is the resource, the capacity for health. And this is something that becomes very complicated in a trauma story. For further kind of exploration and understanding of this, I highly recommend Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, because in it, he really details how the body takes on the trauma. We can be long past the events of a trauma, but our body almost unconsciously does not even recognize that. And so we have to bring the body into healing, literally from just physical wellness, because stress takes a toll on the immune system. It complicates systems in the body that need to be stabilized and restored, right? And some things that maybe don't come back. I worked with a gentleman who had very severe rheumatoid arthritis. And rheumatoid arthritis is one of these autoimmune disorders where it's kind of a question mark, kind of mysterious where it comes from. But my client had this sense that his rheumatoid arthritis was very much built into a childhood marked with ongoing, unrelenting physical abuse. And for him, he felt that this was his body's last way of abusing itself after being so tense through that time. So we have to work with stabilizing the body. So the somatic resources, being able to sense the kind of internal resourcing that our body provides. So in regards to external resources, when we're talking about the somatic realm, this is access to gyms, access to exercise and moving. And in so many ways, the healing from even a traumatic experience can be very well cleared through just ongoing movement, working tension out of the body on a regular basis. Now, let's go from somatic resources to relational resources. So I'm going to reverse a little bit of the order here and talk about the external resources for relationships. So this is family, friends, neighbors, mentors. But here's the other level, and I think a deeper level when we look at helping our clients identify a relational resource. It's more about the internal capacity. For so many of my clients, they will frequently talk about, I can go and be with my friends, but I feel completely like an alien there. I feel alone, even in the midst of a crowd. And so when you're working with a client, initially, you might be the first relational resource that they have, where they can really sense that you are with them and that they can sense regulation in your presence. So you may be on that list initially as their relational resource, both externally and then practicing in therapy how to sense safety in being in relationship with you. Okay, so from relational resources, we're going to move straight into emotional resources. So emotional resources, this is a very interesting resource because we want people to be vulnerable, right? We have so many wonderful people talking about the importance of vulnerability. But if we have been punished for vulnerability, we will have lost the capacity to sense the safety of emotions. So something I was taught in my training with sensory motor is to be able to ask a client, out of our list of emotions, and we went over 10 in a previous session, which of these emotions were okay or not okay for you to experience, say in your family? If your client can identify, these were okay, these were not okay, then you have someone who probably has experienced some level of attachment disturbance, but more often than not, maybe a little bit of wounding. But if you have a client, when you show them that list of emotions and they identify this was safe and this was not safe to experience, safe and not safe is pointing to a traumatized experience. And so we really want to be very careful when it comes to emotional resources. And so we want them to have opportunities to go places where their emotions can be met and received with vulnerability. So again, your therapeutic space or a group setting may be the first place where they can experience, external emotional safety. But we want to deepen their capacity to sense the safety of having their emotions as they are without fixing them or changing the intensity of them. So, from emotional resourcing, we're going to look at psychological resourcing, okay? So when we're looking at psychological resources, this from an external standpoint can be the workbooks, the books, the videos, all of that, but also the psychological capacity. So this is something very interesting. When I've worked with families that have children that they adopted from a very early age, they will say, Dr. Webb, while they were babies and when they were in grade school, they were great. And then we hit adolescence, and I know adolescence is hard, but it's like the whole floor dropped out. What has happened? And so what we look at here when we're talking about psychological resources is that if a person has had to live in survival defenses can look very regulated. And many children, even under that type of innate stress, can be very regulated for a certain period of time. But often, and not surprisingly, by adolescence, they have lost the psychological resources for mental health because they have been living in their survival defenses. So we want to be very mindful that we're not supposed to remain in our survival defenses for life. That's surviving, not thriving. And so psychological resources is strengthening with psychological skills, with psychological regulation and practice, right? And then from the external standpoint are the opportunities to find deeper resources of reading, support groups, 12-step groups to really deepen their capacity for mental health. Okay, so let's move on to some others. How about intellectual resources? When we're intellectual resources, that definitely is our readers and our writers, but also the capacity to come back to having this sense of intelligence. So many of our clients have been told horrible things about their capacity for intellect that we want to give them the opportunity, right? You don't have to have a genius IQ to be successful. And in fact, the people who are most successful on this planet have an average IQ. The people who have very high IQs, unless it's channeled properly, struggle just as much as people who have very low IQs. So it's important to help our clients come back to their capability, their intellectual capability, in wherever that may show up. And it may be having, a really great kind of kinesthetic gift and they work well with their hands, but also they may love to read, they may love to write. So we want to bring them back to that intellectual resource. And from the intellectual resource, we can talk about creative and artistic resources. Now, most people get pretty put off by this that I work with because they're like, Dr. Webb, I cannot draw a circle to save my life. So creativity is more about passion than it is about skill and technique. Yes, that can be channeled, but people can be very creative in multitudes of ways. And so when I think about the internal resource of creativity and artistry, it's more about the capacity to play, to have wonder. When children color and draw, they think that they are the next Picasso, right? They're the next Monet. They don't even question it. And they're so proud to show it to you, right? Because they don't have that shame and guilt and fear vault active. They're just playing. And that's what we want to bring our clients to. Bring them to the play of creativity, right? It doesn't have to hang in a gallery for it to be creative and it to be artistic. Right? My mother, she makes an apple pie that she calls the ugly apple pie. And when she first started making it, it was indeed ugly. But the more she practiced it, now we even joke, we can't even call it ugly apple pie because she makes it so beautiful. And a part of it is because when we practice anything, we build permanence. And so we really want to build that kind of joy and excitement through the creative and artistic resource. Now, we don't want to underestimate another resource, which is the material resource. So we take for granted clothes that feel good on our body, the way that we kind of life hack our environment for ease. When we're in survival mode, we push all of those things away. And so we really want to bring the importance of having material resources in the environment, but also from an interior standpoint, we want our clients to develop the capacity to obtain those material resources, be it work, industry, or even just building out the safety of their home environment. Now, this next one may be a question mark for some, but not for all, so I always include it, which is the spiritual resource. Now, not everyone will want to access a spiritual resource, especially if they have come from some form of spiritual or religious trauma. But for those who find faith in being able to be outside and see, something bigger than themselves, this can be a very important resource. In fact, it takes the internal outside of ourselves, that capacity to think, and not just think, but to expand beyond our own experience to a larger experience. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be any organized religion, but kind of coming into a little bit more mystery. And so that can be a very deep connection for clients, as well as identifying a spiritual community that they can be a part of, which would be an external resource. And finally, something that I think has been studied through the years but is coming back is nature as a resource. And so we are earthy beings. We are connected to this earth. What we do to the earth impacts us as well as it impacts the environment. And so what we want to encourage our clients to do is to find some type of resource with nature, even if it's bringing a plant or growing a garden or going to a park, but engaging with nature and engaging their body with nature, which we have found to be very effective in the healing process. There are so many ways to get clients to be curious about healing their body, to begin this whole process of finding a way back. But when we talk about these resources, I want to leave you with what our ultimate goal is. The ultimate goal is to help our clients come back to their essential selves. When we have suffered trauma, when we have suffered woundings, we become kind of a shell of ourselves. And when we talked about relational character strategies, that's kind of a bit of a shell that starts to form around us. But when we start to heal through the resources, we become more than a disorder, more than a character strategy, and we come back to the essential self that is always growing, always curious, and always exploring.